Chom den den jambe yung na sha za lo Kange lo dwe de nyen ten de ren yedra nam da rab sarave Chinye dungan shi yin zai shire ni che tu kra le wan zen Kanda zibe zun re ma re mun tam dunga che zeve Drosoy kun la puje tarze yin la chuje yong den song Chödrak che do nyamon nyelon le je chak do ndon ze chen ma re mesre dungra nyuk jinye zun de ra de nam ne ta jen sa ju ta se ya se do ja se tu go Chödrak chodan chunyi jende da le me zen jambe yong la ndu zedene che che chen ra sre che da le dem men ba ra sra ne Den je jong lo do ba ye lo je po be non wa za do so Tam ge do je shao je ru zu chong yin je me do du je pong jam ba ser je lun bo da bra je be gu shao je be shao la yin gu sha ca ro Jam ya sha na do je jin re ze sa yin yin bo de ba nam pra ser Nam ge nyen bo shang ba gun du zong nye we se chen je la sha je wo she je ka la chen ra we jen gu re je ze pe dong du je len la po jar we ten ba gun ne san ze pe ge ju ren bo che la sha je wo ju dong ju jen ne lo ma ro wa ra ji jin zeng ne chen be ye she je Droso yig la kenge padre wara rigbidu je shao la ngu sha chal Allah so ho tene che namba so o jab sun ro ye sem dang shang chup cho do sem shang chup gi sem namba ni je su chembe go ne tambe che seru nang
So please begin by taking refuge in the three jewels and to generate the Bodhi mind in its two perspectives.
Ta kare nganzo tare shodegi yorsna tene ta jase shongchup sembe lam ji remba da ma sona kande sin de go gi yoga ti she gi yoga de
So the teaching is concerned with explaining the various practices of a bodhisattva.
Tene ta de jase shongchup sembe lam rem de she yong de te la sanje gen do de Mangu shivu chiginana shongchub sembeke lam dresyu kande se de gogiyo lam jikab ki nyamne khari che gogiyo o ta tensu ko hajang jasham song yo re
Now it's recorded in many sutras how to go about practicing the progressive path of a bodhisattva. How to go about the various practices, as well as when specific practices are appropriate, and so on.
Ten tagana shinge doi gongdon tenzo jenju ge doja solo samna 땅네 가르슈 야가르 팍비유도 페베 제부 담바텐 적게 너든 곧대우 젠 뉘네 송샤베 땡쇼양 하장야 전부 요대브리
There are also many texts which treat this topic that have been authored by the sages of ancient India as well as the sages of Tibet. And in those texts, those individuals explain the details of the practices of bodhisattvas for the benefit of those who train on this path, the path of a bodhisattva.
제부 담바속에 땡죠 예예 두두 할레버 망고 송샤베 요래
And there are many such texts authored by masters of old, both in terms of ancient India and Tibet. Some of these texts or treatises are very extensive, some are very short. Length-wise, there is a great variation in terms of these commentaries to the explanations of Buddha Shakyamuni as recorded in various sutras.
Atidege tinchu mangpu shiwiyo debeke nangne tene jagar phaguyul yinayendra konjingi jongli yinayendra pete roden cheshu rawde shiwale songbe shangju simbe chönju shungendere.
Now, the most well-known in terms of this type of scripture as to both India and Tibet is the Bodhicharya Avatara, authored by the Indian Buddhist master Shantideva.
Ta yin chönju le chasha na yang yongse dawote shologa chi tong yore leu chu yore.
And this text is made up of 10 chapters, and in terms of verses, you find 1,000 verses in this text.
Then that chönju ge nang songbe dante surun dor dune dene uch thome sangbu shungkendege te sholoka sum ta zoju te den sholoka sum sobdung nang la dune songze.
Then there is the text Khenpo Rinpoche explains, authored by the Tibetan Buddhist master of old, Tome Sangpo. And his text, the 37 practices of a bodhisattva, is a summed up version of the Bodhicharya Avatara.
Tati yinde penna karishu tandi Jaselon Soden Masenkin, Jung Yigde, Konsa Chige, Yamne Nangbayina, Kande Dravchene, Song Yorsana, Song Suchi, Do Nesam on the day, Damdunch Tongposhobi.
The Ngoishi want to re sumdu.
Chödrak te matewa che, sholoka ni.
Da sumju sob.
Tene jukjam te matewa che, sumju sobdun te, dönge desen da masana peche namba sumge nanda dune she tuguyu sare.
So this text, authored by Thomas Sampo, the main part, that is to say, the part of it concerned with explaining the practices of a Bodhisattva. Here the reader finds 37 practices. Now the text also has an introductory part and a concluding part. However, in terms of the main part, as was said, the author sets forth 37 practices, and Khenpo Rinpoche says he has given thought to the 37 practices and has found that those 37 practices can be divided into 3 categories.
Ki karirasana dancing thangpo te le thangpo pa shangchup ke sembi nyamnen te che gogundu ten thoma ngazo lam shup khongza ke lam ji nyamnen ki lojong gramba chik.
The first of these 3 segments of this text is about the beginner practitioner, the individual who, to begin with, takes an interest in practicing the path of a Bodhisattva, and who therefore generates the Bodhi mind. Now, this is what motivates the beginner practitioner to enter this path. His interest in and appreciation of the Bodhi mind. And that segment of the text concerns primarily what is known as the practices of mind training.
Tate perna kajuba yinenda, nima bayinenda, satyawa yinenda, bögu chuju sundachigi yina yang. Korwa le lodo namba ye singe songdoa, lodo namba ye.
And in terms of, for example, the Kagyu school, or the Nyingma school, or the Sakya school, or any other school of Tibetan Buddhism,
lodo namba ye singete.
Mind training, to begin with, concerns 4 points known as the 4 contemplations by way of which a practitioner becomes able to turn his back on worldly existence.
Lodo number Yiginane, Tombo Karsam Gure, said Nge Lude, Gachambo Yimba, Ye Kalakao Yimba, Telesama Tangure, Songdola, De La Sholoka Sambatige, the Yungdoa.
Shloka Sumpa.
Yeah. Nika Rigne, Jänner. Ti kontalat,
Tigi kontalare. Och daljor druchen jeka tokti. And the first of these 4 contemplations concerns considering the benefits of, in this life, having obtained a so-called free and well-favored human rebirth. The dango ere.
Dango no kumare. Tene ta sholoka yibate ke kharte inge do sida. Tangal tanjur niekale khawo jigle khawo de thop na yang. Tadong nga ngarang phayule shin chan den rig mare tele kyon yore singete sholoka yibate ke ting gudwa.
Payul pongpa de mara.
Mare nyenje sholan de sha chuta. Dai shola shedong metam bar.
The next verse, number 4, in terms of the 37 practices, sets forth contemplation on impermanence, the importance of that the practitioner understands that the physical body is subject to impermanence, and that therefore attachment to the physical body is in fact a futile mindset, in that the physical body can never be kept forever, simply because in nature, or as to its nature, there is impermanence.
Dirante. Tene tapen sholoka ngawate ke khante inde gundosana. Phayul pone ne vembachi de thumna.
De shipa de la phayul pongwari ngapa de la phayul pongwasi.
Yebate la phayul mapung we chönte tengidoa.
So therefore, as the physical body is impermanent, being concerned with, like most individuals, remaining in one's homeland and having attachment to one's homeland, namely that one's person, the physical body, remains in its birth region, is also a futile mindset, where there is attachment to both the physical body, failing to see its impermanence, as well as one's homeland, wanting the person or the individual to remain there. Tene? Det pagel pumpa ina kanske ne. Det du gogen du.
Tan direndo. Direndo. Yiwa danga ba nikate yibate phayun mapuna nyenji sholan desha dai shola hedon denzo jeyong gres.
Simply because if you remain in your homeland or your hometown, whichever way you look at it, the smaller area or the larger area of belonging in terms of birthplace, if you remain in your birthplace, you will know a lot of people there. You will have various relationships with the people you know, and quite often it will be the case that there will be conflicts and struggles between you and the people you know, which is not a constructive, or which does not make for a constructive environment in terms of making progress on the path of a bodhisattva. If one remains in one's birthplace, the risk is that one will spend quite a lot of time on simply working out various conflicts and the likes because of one's likes and dislikes. All of this, though, originates with one's attachment to what one has in one's homeland, what is familiar to one. Therefore, it's a good idea, as it were, for someone who practices the path of a bodhisattva to leave his or her homeland in order to avoid all of that, spending a great deal of one's time on conflicts and the like with others.
That inject sholoka sum te
Sum de na chongen pampa de chi sum ma sum atanda. Chongen pampa sum song.
shui
La so te nge shu me tanda kan de chi sum song.
perna ta chotu cha sum ne sende je mang.
Hadi Pajul pampa gyalse la ni na go ko song kan de chi na tense.
Yungi pung nyamu rinji na dejong per tiz lapsarwa.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Da sloka kora madan me.
Oh, just sta.
It seems to work again.
There is a technical problem, or
There was one shortly, but I think it works again.
The Tongi Ponta and the Labio Mare, Yindre.
chongen pampa.
The Yindre,
Re yininge kandi shuyima. Shipa de chongen pampa. Sung re study tandama shugo geraves. Shugo re
Mare.
songa.
Lapsai.
Yeah.
Okay. Ripatum Churmisi, when Batam Jasalanis.
Tene da kandi chigurego. Tadinge pashuta in. Dende reis. Kan reisena. Pajula devayina tene yama nyokta la sopa.
Oh, Teta Taganare.
De
Younger, Chesa Payul Pungo, Junsen Teres on Pioro.
Re in shipa de pajul pumpa gyalselalen ingi slokan i remilua tene mita pagomsu.
Mare, then the Sholokai Charan Dene took the Gedoa. Sholoka Jiva Range, Payul Pumate.
Lasso
Choja needs and Rosarava.
dida kan nyokta me tu Khenpo. Ta karina mina ngedi chi kan sungwa de pa shui di na yang sloka shenta chikla pajul pungwa gyalselalen shuma yongerava
Mare Tongi Puma Sanki the Younger, Payul Puma the Young Mare.
well da shuma yonger cheme Ang de ma shu yin yin chongen pongsul de digi kor chi shu me ta.
Oh, take in. Ah, Tene Ta Sholoka Somba Jiva Ngabate.
Na pa nga shu me shu yin.
Oh, yeah, Ngabate Karesana. You'll Nambat Punchana, Yunting Karriore, Sana.
So, therefore, since one's homeland would be a place where afflictive, obscuring states, passion, aggression, and the like easily flourish, it's not a place conducive to practicing the path of a bodhisattva. Therefore, it's better to change address, as it were, namely moving away from that place.
Rikpa tongbo Chödrak yeshe yongye tenzo ge yuande mongbo yore songar.
Nga pa di kapsu.
Nga ba tikapsu.
Nga pa te chong yan pong pa mare.
Mare.
Te ne masu.
Dacha. Chana kane tuk degi yore sana. Shola ke zedong ju tuk degi yore. Tongbo ni de che yore wa.
Mi tak pe gom sul de song song ha.
Tanda Jänner te.
La.
Jänner.
Oh dear. I'm very sorry. There has been a mix-up with the order in my printout. In terms of numbering the verses, kan la gå så gången då.
Shola ka sum sobdön te dene gotsub yor. Tanjon ye pakka ware sa tini mama. Shola ka sambaden gotsub go yor.
No.
Okay.
Oh dear. We began with the importance of the free and well-favored human rebirth, which is the first of the 37 practices. Number 2, was concerned with leaving one's homeland for the reasons that were mentioned. Number 3, dangan så sumpa la ledder.
Ja.
Det kan du som
Te yungen te pangna nyamun te kale drip progress chadong topat.
Now, verse number 3, explains the effects of leaving one's homeland, meaning leaving the place where attachment, aversion, and the like can easily flourish. What would be the effect of doing that? Well, when bad circumstances are left behind, then afflictive, obscuring states of mind, such as passion, aggression, and the like, will gradually subside. Therefore, to leave one's homeland is the practice of a bodhisattva, and once one has left one's homeland and left behind the circumstances involved, circumstances that are counterproductive as to making progress on the path of a bodhisattva. Once one has gotten that far and settled in a place where conditions are conducive in terms of making progress on this path of a Bodhisattva, then the effect is, or the effects are, that afflictive obscuring states gradually subside and awareness clears so that certainty in the Buddha Dharma can develop. Therefore, Bodhisattvas do just this, namely leave their homeland behind and then go on to settle perhaps in one place or to move from one place to another in order to counteract afflictive obscuring states so that awareness clears and certainty in the Dharma can arise.
Hola, so tatine lalin so dembe na ne lalin jiwa te karares na. Ta ne wemba deb kala karam maju che. Rang lu nongje tro tsang ke jigin juyimba meta ku chuni de la samatang sho song.
And that brings us to verse number 4. Which is concerned with contemplating impermanence to a great extent. Now, having left one's homeland behind and therefore obtained conditions conducive as to making progress on the path of a Bodhisattva, next one contemplates the impermanent nature of all other individuals as well as of all things. Possessions, relationships with others, the other individuals, and so on.
Tati Jänner ten karsong degdosana. Tan nevembal dedu kabla ina yang. Duksum pelbe tropung yambata pankures.
And the place that one settles in should preferably be a calm and quiet place, a place of solitude. And once one has found such a place, it's also important, in order to be able to make progress, to make sure that the individuals one interacts with are good people, as it were, people who also take an interest in the path of a Bodhisattva. One should at all costs avoid so-called bad friends, individuals with a mindset that would influence one perhaps to the point where loving kindness and compassion for others are undermined.
Laso lalin sodeng nang ne ta lalin ngaba charche ta lalin chupat kharresna
Dina yang Deitsen sumla yeva chigin summa suni.
Cheta desin tangbo da dandan ro yo mare. Kharesna dandan de so khanga ngondu chöro.
Laso.
Ngondu ka ngajo pena nga ngondu chegi yo se de dongbo lodo number che yong ge wa danjorin yeka chewa meta sge. Di ren baten ro de ge do wa. Ta ti yetla tang November de ne karate devendig mare shinyi thambate lama tsini da dembachi tengore song.
And while in a place of solitude, having left one's homeland, one focuses on the practices of listening to teachings, reflect upon their meaning, and meditate. Now, in order to be able to do so, one needs to seek out an authentic spiritual friend and maintain a relationship with that individual for the sake of progress on the path of a Bodhisattva. Now, this Tome Sangpo explains in verse number 6 the importance of relying upon a qualified spiritual friend. And by doing so, the practitioner can then make progress, develop qualities conducive in terms of making progress on the path of a Bodhisattva.
다 신이 탐바 때때네 되네 뒤 총의 최슈 되네 대신기 잠로 투모만이 반로 투바지 제거래 송.
And as was said, one takes teachings from the qualified spiritual friend, the spiritual guide, and in the context of the path of a Bodhisattva, that path being the path found in Mahayana Buddhism, one also needs to develop knowledge of and skill in the practice of taking refuge according to how that practice is done in Mahayana Buddhism. One needs to have a good knowledge of what the practice of taking refuge is about in Mahayana Buddhism, as the path of a Bodhisattva is the primary feature of Mahayana Buddhism.
Laso. Tene ta ti ye tala kharte nang do sana. Tan de ten yung do wa. Ngaran so lodo nambe shi ka la 단주른 예가 지원 메타 승게데 송차르네 다 코르베님이 송게데 바제 송비유서래.
Now we're going through the verses associated with the first of the three categories in terms of a possible way of dividing this text, the 37 practices, into just three categories. And as was said, this category, the first of the three, is concerned with the details of how a beginner begins this path. And that involves, among other things, or primarily, the four thoughts or contemplations by way of which a practitioner should be able to turn his back on samsara. And we've gone through the verses that are connected with a free and well-favored human rebirth, the first of the four contemplation, as well as the second, that of contemplating the impermanent nature of each and everything. That dympare, va?
Oh, sholoka.
Dympare.
Dympare do.
Ladu.
Okay.
Kyapsudro.
Kyapsudro dympare the. Tene kyapsudro. Tene tandela tinrem rawate gepatela te tin tigindoa. Legend reg chute tin tigindoa.
Tene dympang är shumeda.
Ja, dympate penanganjo ngunju kamrawchi na chamrote 로도 남진 된 로차를 예들 송비어래 투문게 로도 남진 로차데 투문 마인 로도 가르 송어래 단델라 잠로때 단다 덴백갑데 송구도가
Next, in verse 7, the practice of taking refuge is explained.
Dene jepati kabla tengi song sum ke dunge de zem betu bajres ti into ngarang ke so la phamna yang dene dikpa mege mise sambe lot gore so tela lo chung.
In the 8th verse, the author explains about the importance of giving up non-virtuous actions or evil deeds. That an authentic practitioner wouldn't engage in evil deeds even at the cost of his life, meaning he would rather die than engage in an evil deed.
Penang nisong sung dunga singete dikpa mige khonal ten shongare.
Now, rebirth in any of the three lower existences happens because of evil deeds. Therefore, a genuine practitioner needs to be prepared simply to rather die than engage in an evil deed.
Hola so ta dancing gobate karte in debindo sana ta korwa le shema chawa korwe dende kare yena yang tela shema chawa te jengan chol gogyo re somot.
Verse number 9 explains the importance of giving up attachment to things and to individuals.
That teacher do bana dancing sumbatene zong te karte in debindo da.
Dancing sumpa, said you?
Danjo nyekane zong te gonda choloka sambare tangan mor.
Shloka sumpa ne?
Ja, that inte sembo.
Okay.
Go through det. Ta
Med det dangbo va?
dangbo re, daji dangbo shusane dandan de parto ngondu chöre.
Chupa barto.
Ja.
So, Khenpo Rinpoche has explained in brief about the first 9 verses in terms of the 37 practices. And the first 9 of the 37 practices are about the first of the 3 segments or categories that this text can be divided into. And these 9 practices are connected primarily with the 4 contemplations by way of which a practitioner becomes able to turn his back on samsara.
Di jetna sholoka chuba tene zongte sholoka yeshu tsadu pardu shangchub sem sengetela ngazo tan donna shangchub sem tela kunzop shangchub sem do tendam shangchub sem yire tela lo yongne yangdo kamchub kaptre.
Then there are the verses or practices 10 through 26 and these practices are about how a practitioner generates and then cultivates the body-mind in its two perspectives, relative and absolute. And the practitioner, in terms of cultivating the body-mind, does so in order to familiarize himself with this mindset and in the end achieve this mindset or accomplish the so-called body-mind. So if we look at the progressive order here, the path of a bodhisattva begins by working with oneself so that one becomes an individual able to practice the path in question. And here the practitioner needs to really contemplate the so-called free and well-favored human rebirth, as well as the impermanent nature of it and of all other things. And there are extensive explanations as to these 2 points throughout the Buddhist scriptures.
And if one does these contemplations or practices properly, one will become a practitioner who for certain knows how to go about this path. One will have developed to the extent where one can begin this path. And therefore one is able to commit to this path in the presence of the spiritual guide. One, as it were, commits to the path by way of what is known as taking the Bodhisattva vows in the presence of an authentic spiritual guide. And once one has made that commitment, one then has to train as to the various perspectives of the so-called body-mind. One needs to familiarize oneself with the body-mind. And one starts with training in the relative perspective of the body-mind. And
there are many stages here involving generating and cultivating both loving kindness and compassion.
And
once progress has been made with respect to this perspective of the body-mind, one goes on to train in the absolute perspective of the body-mind. And one needs to continue to train till one gets to the point where one is certain of that one can actually act appropriately in terms of both perspectives, relative and absolute, as to the Bodhi mind, where there are clear signs of and knowledge of that I have trained to the point where I'm now able to make this my only path, as it were.
Tene tenchen somebody 당에 정축비 쩌발은 죽고 여러다. 쩌바 바로도 semba 주 생게 송거도.
And once one is certain in this way, one has made progress enough in terms of being able to act in the context of the 6 virtues which transcend the ways of the world, the 6 paramitas.
That is on the penatincho gungujitella, Tangbo Mundu Chu, the net lojong the Chu, the Nishonchu with your Pachomate, Tinala, do we about.
So these verses, up to and through the 26th practice, cover the preliminary part of this path, as well as mind training, as well as engaging in the deeds of a true Bodhisattva.
That is Tunsin Sum Songweg in Michiguna. That is on your
Now, a person who has achieved what was described as to these 3 points is a true Bodhisattva. It is a person or individual who is able to practice the path of a Bodhisattva. Now, this text is very brief in terms of its length. However, meaning-wise, it covers a very large area of knowledge, or field of knowledge, as it were. So one shouldn't sort of have a somewhat lower opinion of it because of its short length, as it were, making or arriving at the presumption that, it's just sort of a pamphlet type of text. There can't be much to it, because that isn't the case. Jänner Rinpoche says he doesn't know if you who listen today have arrived at that preconception, as it were, of the text. However, Khenpo Rinpoche himself says he has met many people who've said or who've stated, well, it's a very short text, it's not much that one needs to really reckon with, it's just a pamphlet type of publication, and statements like that simply point to that the person who has presumed this is a person who doesn't really understand the text, in that this person fails to see that this is not the case. Khenpo Rinpoche asks you to please give thought to the explanations and read it in the light of the larger or more extensive perspective of it. And then practice the instructions set forth in it. So we'll now continue with this text itself and verse 26.
Sutim mepar random mintup na.
Hur gick det? Sultrim mepar rangi shaitan mari chanchup. Ja.
Sutim mepar random mintup na yendun drupar depakemu ne somare. Perna
Chasang Mari.
Chasang Ma Shushan Desir Sikbe Dumba Mepa Yitrim Song Yasela Yins.
And verse 26 reads as follows: without discipline, you can't even achieve benefit for yourself. So wanting to benefit others is just a joke. Thus, to maintain a discipline that is free of worldly aspirations or free of attachment to this world is the practice of a Bodhisattva.
Ta sutim senkente sul tem jebre sul sede yilungam nesung ngomage sul kari yimba tem sede tisung devatala tem jebate.
So the word discipline or ethics is about, in this context, an individual upholding a code of ethics in a way which accords with the principles of that code of ethics.
Tene tate kandechres na perna sokje de ndawaji yina churdong thumbaji marawa ngaran so te kase ke chembo yina yimba na yin so korang wen ke chembo re te yin so de mare.
So
mache songre de ta temjwa.
If one looks at a discipline or code of ethics, whether in the context of Buddhism or any other religion or in the context of the world, we can look at the act of taking the life of another sentient being. Now, quite naturally, doing so would, to the minds of the majority, be about acting in a way which contradicts good ethics. To the minds of the majority, it's not a good thing to take the life of another sentient being. So you have the nature of that act and the ethics. So to take the life of another sentient being means that you contradict good ethics, or you rather act in a way that opposes good ethics.
Te pen kande chi yong ge yarsana yin yidang che pa pong ba chi la pong be sim de la chutim song bi
Jänner shi dang chepa.
pong be sim yin.
So it's about a mindset which doesn't concern itself with the fact that harm is inflicted upon another sentient being. And in order to take, for example, the life of another sentient being, that would require the person who does that using an instrument of sorts, a knife or whatever. So this act of taking the life of another sentient being involves both the instrument used in order to achieve the death of the sentient being in question, as well as the act of doing so, namely taking the life of the sentient being in question.
Perna nyasin yegi nyada chi zöwe yina.
If we look at what is it called in English? Not fishing with a net, but fishing with a fishing line.
Tin yin ne pa che bi yirwa. Te chuldan thamba marwa tin de zoyet.
Kändan chepa chepe shi se du ko lakcha de la kogore kan det kogore.
Lakcha zoatala.
Sova pena sodra ne sova.
Zodra tas de nyas simyeg tonda yin tin zove ge semti ne be yite kus zogi.
Det där kogare va. Det gjorde tene det pa ko nekab chikdang drago gere.
Zoe nekab.
So this involves also the manufacturing of the instrument used. If we look at a fishing rod, and then there is a small device attached to it, the hook, which the fish swallows, and thus you can draw it in and then take its life and then cook it or whatever people do with it. Now, here when one looks at the details as to what is involved in fishing in this way, for example, you also have to take into consideration the mindset of the person who, to begin with, invented this device, and then all the individuals who manufacture this kind of device. The mindset of the person who invented the device in question and the mindsets of those who manufacture this kind of device these mindsets are mindsets that contradict good ethics. So even at that level, even prior to the fish or the life of the fish being taken, you have all the preparatory phases, as it were, which make that possible. You have to consider that as well in terms of bad ethics. Or in terms of understanding what is meant by bad ethics. So, someone who attempts to practice the path of a Bodhisattva would be a person who considers all those details and understands these details, and who therefore avoids involving himself as to any of the phases involved, whether it's about inventing a device like this, or manufacturing a device like this, or going fishing and taking the life of a fish. So you have the basis, independence, upon which catching a fish and killing it, as was just explained, a proper bodhisattva or practitioner of the path of a bodhisattva would not involve himself in any of this. He would also not go fishing and take the life in this way of a fish.
Chutim jik songa yina. Tene, when I latam me come top to be yore, tarba to be tin chag yore, then mena yong tab yomare.
So if one takes care to this extent in terms of divorcing oneself from non-virtue or evil deeds, if one's ethics are like this, or involve all of this, then sultim den de sungu.
Te sungna la tang mi tenzang togure shangchup drupe.
One will obtain a good rebirth, for example, in one's next life, either as a human being or a god. Okay, Slatang, Tanda.
Slatang mi lu ten top tarba drupe ten te top ne tarba drupe yitsa chagi.
A rebirth that's free and well favored, in dependence upon which liberation from samsara can be accomplished.
다 된줄라 되네 개와 간고 니주 담배 처럼 송대
Jänner Chidang Chepa, then the
Jänner Yidang Chepa Pong Yinping Yidang Chepa Drup Sambatala Niju Dambe Sutams.
Then, having divorced himself, the practitioner, from all the phases explained in the context of non-virtue, the practitioner, having achieved this, can or is able to engage in deeds by way of which he would benefit others. And thus he becomes, or he is, a practicing Bodhisattva who has gathered, as it were, all conditions needed to be able to engage properly in the path of a Bodhisattva, to engage properly in the conduct of a Bodhisattva.
Ti ye la sanje songrap sola tsuru chendu tarba kona la mingna lobjong chebatala gewa chödrak chutim song.
Tanda geva Chödrak
Tanda yeju dambe chutim shuwa.
Sorry, I have to correct myself here. I went one step ahead. In terms of what was explained in the context of non-virtue and the various perspectives and phases of non-virtuous deeds, to divorce oneself from all those aspects of non-virtue makes for the practitioner having given up, or rather refraining from non-virtue of any kind. Next, you have another type of virtue, the one that I accidentally mentioned, namely also having achieved the capacity to execute the deeds of a proper Bodhisattva.
Tatigi chutim parsinte tubare.
And that ends the explanation of number 26 as to the 37 practices of a Bodhisattva.
Lasso tatrinte cheki.
So that's all for today.
Sunonde ye damje zigban ye tone nye be danam pamje jega na je bala chubai sigbe chole do sho. Imagine Kiki Ekselius.